Beneath the endless white expanse of Greenland's ice sheet, where temperatures plunge to -40 degrees and snowstorms rage for weeks, the United States military once built one of the Cold War's most audacious and closely guarded secrets. Project Iceworm was an ambitious plan to construct a vast network of nuclear missile launch sites beneath the ice, capable of surviving a Soviet first strike and delivering devastating retaliation. What began as a scientific research station became a subterranean city, complete with living quarters, laboratories, and enough infrastructure to support hundreds of personnel in one of Earth's most hostile environments. The true purpose of this frozen fortress remained classified for decades, hidden behind the innocent facade of Camp Century, a supposed climate research facility. The story of Project Iceworm reveals the extraordinary lengths to which Cold War superpowers would go in their quest for strategic advantage, the remarkable engineering achievements required to build beneath ice, and the environmental consequences that continue to emerge from the melting ice sheet today. The late 1950s marked a period of Cold War tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. The launch of Sputnik in 1957 shocked American military planners, demonstrating Soviet technological prowess and raising fears about the vulnerability of United States strategic assets. Nuclear strategists on both sides engaged in complex calculations about first strike capabilities, retaliatory options, and the grim mathematics of mutually assured destruction. American military planners faced a persistent challenge. How could they ensure that enough nuclear weapons would survive a surprise Soviet attack to mount an effective counterattack? Fixed missile silos, no matter how hardened, could be targeted and destroyed. Bombers on airfields were vulnerable. The solution, they reasoned, required thinking beyond conventional approaches. The Army's interest in Greenland went beyond its strategic location. The island sat between the United States and the Soviet Union, positioned perfectly for missiles aimed at Soviet targets. More importantly, the ice sheet itself offered a unique form of protection. A mobile missile system buried beneath hundreds of feet of ice would be virtually impossible to target with any accuracy. The missiles could be moved through tunnels, making their locations unpredictable. Even if the Soviets knew the base's general location, destroying it would require multiple direct nuclear hits on the ice sheet itself. Denmark, which controlled Greenland, had granted the United States permission to establish military installations on the island as part of NATO defense arrangements. However, the true scope and purpose of what the Americans planned to build was never fully disclosed to the Danish government. This deception would later become a significant diplomatic issue. In 1959, the United States Army Corps of Engineers began construction on what was publicly described as Camp Century, a research facility dedicated to studying construction techniques under Arctic conditions and conducting scientific research on the ice sheet. The official narrative emphasized peaceful scientific pursuits. Researchers would study ice core samples to understand Earth's climate history, test equipment in extreme conditions, and develop construction techniques that might prove useful for future Arctic operations. It was a compelling story, and it was partially true. Construction crews worked through brutal Arctic conditions to establish the facility. They created an access route across the ice sheet, transported thousands of tons of equipment, and began the extraordinary task of tunneling into the ice itself. The engineering challenges were immense. Building a permanent structure on a moving ice sheet requires fundamentally different approaches than conventional construction. The Greenland ice sheet moves continuously, flowing like an extremely slow river toward the sea. Any rigid structure would be torn apart by the ice's movement within months. The solution was to work with the ice rather than against it. Engineers excavated trenches in the ice using modified equipment, creating long corridors beneath the surface. These trenches were then covered with arched steel roofs that could flex and move with the ice. The entire complex was buried beneath the surface, insulated from the savage winds and extreme temperatures above. At its peak, Camp Century consisted of 21 tunnels cut into the ice, covering an area equivalent to several city blocks. The main street stretched more than 1,000 feet through the ice. Branching corridors housed living quarters, a kitchen and mess hall, recreation areas, laboratories, storage facilities, and workshops. The base accommodated between 85 and 200 personnel, depending on the season. Living quarters were surprisingly comfortable by military standards. Small rooms carved from ice and lined with insulation provided private spaces. Common areas offered recreation opportunities, including a library, a theater for showing films, and even a small chapel. Perhaps most remarkably, Camp Century was powered by the world's first mobile nuclear reactor. The PM-2A portable nuclear power plant was transported to the site and installed in 1960, providing both electricity and heat. This was crucial because conventional fuel supplies would have been prohibitively expensive and logistically challenging. The reactor could generate 1.5 megawatts of electrical power, while also producing steam for heating the facility. Water was obtained by melting ice, and a sophisticated waste management system dealt with sewage and other waste products. The ventilation system constantly circulated air through the tunnels, preventing carbon dioxide buildup. The facility included a well-equipped hospital for treating injuries and illnesses in an environment where evacuation might be impossible for weeks during winter storms. The camp was designed to be as self-sufficient as possible, capable of sustaining operations even if cut off from resupply for extended periods. Behind this impressive feat of Arctic engineering lay Project Iceworm's true purpose. The plan called for constructing a massive network of tunnels extending hundreds of miles through the ice sheet. These tunnels would house approximately 600 medium-range ballistic missiles, each armed with nuclear warheads and mounted on mobile launch platforms. The missiles would be constantly repositioned through the tunnel network, preventing Soviet intelligence from pinpointing their locations. Launch crews would maintain the weapons in climate-controlled chambers, ready to receive firing orders at any time. In the event of nuclear war, the missiles would be raised through vertical shafts melted in the ice, breaking through the surface to launch their deadly payloads towards Soviet targets. The scale of the proposed operation was staggering. The tunnel network would have required approximately 52,000 miles of excavated passages, creating a subterranean city larger than many contemporary urban areas. Thousands of military personnel would staff the facility, living beneath the ice for months at a time. Support infrastructure would include additional nuclear reactors, vast fuel storage facilities, ammunition bunkers, and all the facilities needed to sustain a substantial military population. Military planners estimated that even if the Soviet Union launched a massive first strike against United States territory, destroying cities and military bases across the continent, the Iceworm installations would survive. Protected by hundreds of feet of ice and spread across an enormous area, the mobile missile batteries would be nearly impossible to eliminate. America's ability to retaliate would remain intact, preserving the delicate balance of nuclear deterrence. While Project Iceworm's military objectives were classified, the scientific research conducted at Camp Century was genuine and produced significant discoveries. Ice core drilling operations extracted cylinders of ice from deep within the ice sheet, creating a record of Earth's climate stretching back millennia. These ice cores trapped air bubbles containing atmospheric samples from ancient times, along with dust, volcanic ash, and other materials that settled on the ice sheet over thousands of years. By analyzing these cores, scientists could reconstruct past temperatures, atmospheric composition, volcanic activity, and even aspects of ancient ecosystems. The Camp Century ice cores eventually reached depths of nearly 4,550 feet, penetrating through the ice sheet to the bedrock below. This was a remarkable achievement that provided unprecedented insight into Earth's climate history. The cores revealed patterns of ice ages and warm periods, showing that Earth's climate had fluctuated dramatically over geological time. One particularly significant discovery came decades later, when scientists reanalyzed material from the deepest sections of the cores. In 2019, researchers examining sediment from beneath the ice found fossilized plants, suggesting that Greenland had been ice-free within the past million years. This discovery had profound implications for understanding ice sheet stability and future climate change. Despite the engineering achievements and sophisticated planning, Project Iceworm was ultimately doomed by the ice sheet itself. The same ice that promised to protect the missile installations also made them impossible to maintain. Engineers discovered that the ice sheet's movement was more complex and severe than anticipated. The ice did not simply flow uniformly. It compressed, expanded, and shifted in ways that created enormous stress on structures buried within it. The tunnels at Camp Century began deforming almost immediately after excavation, requiring constant maintenance to remain usable. The arched steel ceilings that covered the trenches buckled under the pressure. Ice walls compressed inward, narrowing passages and threatening to crush equipment. Floor levels changed as the ice beneath them either compressed or rose. Doors and hatches that had opened freely became jammed as their frames twisted out of alignment. Maintenance crews worked continuously to shore up collapsing sections, but they were fighting a losing battle. The ice's creep rate exceeded predictions by a significant margin. Sections of tunnel required re-excavation within months of initial construction. Equipment designed to last years needed replacement after seasons of operation. Most critically for Project Iceworm's military objectives, engineers realized that extending the tunnel network to the scale envisioned would be impossible. The ice simply would not permit permanent structures of the size required. Even if the initial excavation could be completed, maintaining hundreds of miles of tunnels would require an enormous workforce engaged in constant repair work. Financial realities also intruded. The costs of constructing and maintaining Camp Century far exceeded initial estimates. The development of intercontinental ballistic missiles and submarine-launched ballistic missiles provided alternative solutions to the strategic challenges that Iceworm was meant to address. Intercontinental ballistic missiles in hardened silos across the American Midwest could strike Soviet targets with greater accuracy than medium-range missiles launched from Greenland. Submarine-launched missiles offered the mobility and survivability that Project Iceworm promised, but without the engineering nightmares of building in ice. Nuclear submarines could patrol anywhere in the world's oceans, making their locations truly unpredictable. In 1963, the Army began scaling back operations at Camp Century. In 1964, the Army officially abandoned Project Iceworm, acknowledging that the concept was not feasible with existing technology. Camp Century continued limited operations for several more years, but the nuclear reactor was removed in 1964 and the base was officially closed in 1967. When the military abandoned Camp Century, they left behind a substantial amount of material. The official plan assumed that the ice sheet would continue accumulating snow, gradually burying the facility deeper until it was permanently entombed in ice. Everything left behind would be compressed and eventually carried to sea as the ice sheet flowed toward the coast, where it would carve off as icebergs and melt into the ocean. This assumption seemed reasonable at the time. The ice sheet was accumulating more snow than it was losing, and climate scientists in the 1960s had no reason to believe this would change significantly. The abandoned base, they calculated, would be safely buried for millennia. However, the materials left behind included more than just steel and equipment. The site contains an estimated 200,000 liters of diesel fuel, along with unknown quantities of other petroleum products. Polychlorinated biphenyls, toxic compounds used in electrical equipment, were also left in the ice. The nuclear reactor itself was removed, but low-level radioactive waste from its operation remained. Biological waste from the personnel who lived at the base was also abandoned, frozen in the ice. In total, Researchers estimate that approximately 20,000 tons of material remain buried at the former Camp Century site. For decades, these materials remained safely frozen, buried under accumulating snow and ice. But climate change has fundamentally altered the equation. The Greenland ice sheet is now losing mass at an accelerating rate. Rising temperatures have increased both surface melting and the rate at which glaciers flow toward the sea. Scientific studies published in 2016 warned that Camp Century's buried infrastructure could be exposed to melting conditions within this century. As the ice thins and melting increases, the frozen waste could begin to mobilize. Diesel fuel, polychlorinated biphenyls, and other contaminants could enter the ice sheet's meltwater, potentially reaching the ocean. The legal and political implications are complex. The waste was abandoned under an assumption of permanent frozen storage that climate change has invalidated. Who bears responsibility for cleanup? The United States, which built the facility and left the waste? Denmark, which controls Greenland but was not fully informed about the base's true purpose? Or Greenland itself, which has gained increasing autonomy and may face the consequences of contamination in its territorial waters? The full story of Project Iceworm remained classified for decades after Camp Century's closure. The Danish government learned the complete truth about the base's purpose only gradually, as documents were declassified and researchers pieced together the facility's history. In 1995, the Danish Foreign Policy Institute published a report that revealed the extent to which Denmark had been kept in the dark about United States military activities in Greenland during the Cold War. The report documented how American officials had deliberately obscured the true nature of Camp Century and Project Iceworm, presenting the base as a scientific facility while concealing its intended military purpose. This revelation strained Danish-American relations and sparked debate in Denmark about the country's Cold War role. Many Danes felt betrayed by an ally who had secretly planned to deploy nuclear weapons on Danish territory without proper consultation or consent. For Greenlanders, the revelations added another chapter to a history of their island being used for great power strategic purposes without their consultation or consent. Greenland had served as a vital staging area during World War II, and American military installations had been built across the island during the Cold War. The discovery that one of these bases had been intended as a massive nuclear weapons facility reinforced feelings of colonial subjugation. As Greenland has gained greater autonomy from Denmark and contemplates full independence, the legacy of Camp Century serves as a reminder of the island's strategic importance and the challenges that come with it. The environmental cleanup costs could fall to a future independent Greenland government, while geopolitical interest in the island continues as climate change opens new shipping routes and exposes mineral resources previously locked in ice. Project Iceworm represents both the ambition and the hubris of Cold War strategic thinking. The project demonstrated remarkable engineering capability and innovative problem-solving. Creating a functional base beneath the ice sheet, powered by nuclear energy and supporting hundreds of personnel in extreme conditions, was a genuine achievement. Yet the project also reveals the limitations of human ambition when confronting natural forces. The ice sheet proved stronger than the engineers who sought to master it. No amount of ingenuity could overcome the fundamental reality that ice moves, compresses, and changes in ways that make permanent construction impossible. The environmental legacy of Camp Century illustrates how decisions made with incomplete understanding can create long-term consequences. The military planners who abandoned the base assumed that accumulating snow would bury it forever. They could not have anticipated that human-caused climate change would fundamentally alter the ice sheet's behavior, potentially exposing their buried waste to melting conditions. This creates a painful irony. The fossil fuel consumption that powered industrial civilization, including the military operations at Camp Century, has contributed to climate change that now threatens to release the base's toxic legacy. The ice that was meant to preserve the base forever is instead melting, turning a Cold War relic into a contemporary environmental challenge. Today, Camp Century exists only as buried remnants, slowly being crushed by the ice sheet's inexorable movement. The tunnels have long since collapsed, compressed by millions of tons of ice. Equipment left behind is being ground to pieces, mixing with ice and sediment as it slowly moves toward the sea. The base that was meant to be a triumph of Cold War engineering instead became a monument to human limitations. The nuclear city beneath the ice never progressed beyond a single research station. Project Iceworm's failure demonstrated that some environments remain beyond human capacity to control or permanently alter. Yet the legacy of Camp Century continues to evolve. Scientific research conducted there advanced our understanding of Earth's climate and continues to yield insights as researchers reanalyze ice cores with modern techniques. The engineering lessons learned from building in ice contributed to knowledge that has applications in extreme environment construction. As climate change accelerates and the Greenland ice sheet continues to lose mass, Camp Century may yet emerge from the ice, its toxic waste potentially contaminating the Arctic environment. Monitoring continues, and discussions about potential cleanup operations have begun. The frozen Cold War time capsule may soon thaw, releasing both physical contamination and renewed debate about the legacy of that tense era. Project Iceworm stands as a testament to both human ingenuity and human folly. It reminds us that technological capability does not guarantee practical success, that natural systems operate on scales and timeframes that defy human control, and that decisions made in one era can create consequences that echo for generations. Beneath Greenland's ice lies not just a forgotten military base, but a complex story about ambition, deception, environmental change, and the unpredictable ways in which history refuses to stay buried.